This reading is by American poet Alice Walker from her book Hard Times Require Furious Dancing. This is called The World Has Changed. The world has changed. Wake up and smell the possibility. The world has changed. It did not change without your prayers, without your faith, without your determination to believe in liberation and kindness, without your dancing through the years that had no beat. The world has changed. It did not change without your numbers, your fierce love of self and cosmos. It did not change without your strength. The world has changed. Wake up. Give yourself the gift of a new day. The world has changed. This does not mean that you were never hurt. The world has changed. Rise, yes, and shine. Resist the siren call of disbelief. The world has changed. Don't let yourself remain asleep to it. In this poem, Alice Walker references dancing through the years that had no beat. This year had no beat, y'all, and I am not here to try and make sense or rhythm of it. I am not here to try and find a silver lining. This year was hard, and I think there's something powerful about simply honoring that without trying to justify it. This is our last Sunday together of 2020, and I am struck by how many big questions this year has brought up. My 4-year-old, Henry, has asked some pretty good ones this year. They asked me, why don't circles have sides? I found out eventually that they do. They have an inside and an outside. They asked, why did Rumi, our cat, scratch them? It was because they pulled her tail. But in the last month or so, they have started asking me, when we read stories and watch TV, why the characters are not wearing masks. That one's a little harder to answer. They have asked me more times than I can count when the germ monster will be over so that we can go home to Tennessee to go visit their granny and our friends. I wish I had an answer for them. While we have a bit of a clearer picture now, even more is becoming unclear and has been. Why is a life-saving vaccine being politicized? Why were masks politicized? Why has caring for our neighbors been politicized? Beloved children's television creator Fred Rogers said, "In times of stress, the best thing we can do for each other is to listen with our ears and our hearts, and to be assured that our questions are just as important as the answers." In this year that had no beat and offers very few answers for plenty of questions, I find comfort in that. Rogers died in 2003, but I wonder what he might be saying about this year if he was still Earthside. So if you're not familiar, Fred Rogers was a Presbyterian minister and educator before he created the long-cherished children's series, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He was beloved by generations of children for his kind words, gentle demeanor, and ability to speak to children in a way that was simultaneously developmentally appropriate, engaging, and true. This way of communication has been lovingly dubbed Fred-ish, and it abides by some simple rules. By using these rules as guides, I think we can get a pretty close guess as to what Mr. Rogers might say if he were here today. To do this, We start with a very simple statement, such as, "This was a hard year." Next, the statement should be rephrased in a positive manner, such as, "We survived a really hard year, and that is something to be proud of, even though it was difficult." The rephrasing and clarifying process of Fred-ish repeats itself a few times, seeking more inclusion and simplicity and becoming more developmentally appropriate each time. Eventually, the goal is to end up with a statement that is clear, validating, and frames the information with positivity and support, even when the content itself isn't especially positive. So, "This was a hard year" might eventually turn into, "Many of us learned so much about ourselves this year and so much about our neighbors and neighborhoods. It was difficult, and we did our best. It is important to remember that our best is different when we are in a new or difficult situation. And this one was both. I am so proud of you for managing it. I hope you know that." I don't know about y'all, but that is exactly the kind of thing I needed to hear this year. So while Roger's legacy continues in a new children's series called Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, and in countless other ways, many of us who grew up with Fred-ish on our TVs and in our hearts are now adults. And while we now exist in grown-up bodies with seemingly more complex lives, we may feel far removed from the children who so much needed to hear, "Look for the helpers. I am so proud of you, and I like you just the way you are." But perhaps we are not quite so far removed as we think. Because, you see, those children are still a part of us, and we may even be seeing them a little more than usual these days. It is a perfectly natural and anticipated response to trauma, including large-scale, long-term traumas such as the pandemic, to regress and retreat into ourselves. This is normal. Maybe this situation makes us feel powerless in a way we might have felt when we were children, or simply makes us feel small or vulnerable. But just the same way that we can return to our childlike fear, we can also return to our childlike wonder. So my child Henry, who had some very big questions this year, also imparted some incredible wisdom and compassion on the world. Often, especially when I am in a hurry, they make a point to stop and talk to every single tree and plant that we pass on our travels. They are delighted for every single dog that we see and remind me to ask the herbs that I grow for permission before I cut them. In an embodiment of pure wisdom, their solution for most problems, from boo-boos to lost keys, is give it some love. I am so incredibly proud of their huge heart and their beautiful soul, and I know that this childlike wonder is precious. And I also know that it is not exclusive to childhood. We adults must simply be willing to return to it. I said I was not going to try and make a silver lining of this year, and I do stand by that. But perhaps there are just some glimmers of hope. Maybe this year, in all of the hardship, you got to witness something beautiful. Maybe an especially lovely sunset, a moving piece of music, a poem or book that made you appreciate the beauty of this life. Maybe you were delighted by something this year. Maybe a surprise, such as a kind word you weren't expecting, or a kind deed from someone in your church community. Maybe, just maybe, this year was hard, and the child in you can still be deeply in touch with the wonder of the world we live in. I invite you to connect with that child now. Call them to mind, or take a moment to remember what it felt like to be them. Ask them what they might need to hear after this year. In my own wondering and mulling over what Mr. Rogers might say about 2020, I think above all he would say, as he so often did to the children watching his show, I am so proud of you. So, if no one has told you today, or if no one has told you in this year that has no beat, allow me. I am so proud of you. Yes, you. You who organized in your community, who sent cards to faraway community members, who wrote postcards to voters, who voted yourself, who donned your mask to protest and to brave the grocery store, who engaged in the holy disruption of education and of demanding justice. You who learned how to work and learn from home, who took on the challenges of learning new technology and the pressure to act like everything is okay when it is so obviously not okay. You who took on this new normal, which with as much grace as you could muster, even and especially when that was none at all. I am so proud of you who stayed home when it felt like you were the last one still trying, who worked essential jobs, who kept going and kept caring when you saw endless images on the news and in your news feed of those who didn't care. You who continued to care. And if nothing else, I am so proud of you for surviving this year. I know it wasn't easy. I know you did your best, and it was hard. And it is so hard when our best is still not what we expected. I know that you may not have heard this as much as you need to. I am so proud of you. One of my favorite things that we do in person in my home congregation is that we hold hands for the benediction. My every prayer is that we will all be back together in person next year so that we can have these hugs and hold our hands the way that we long to. In the meantime, I invite you to place one hand over your heart and one hand facing your screen so that you might give and receive some loving energy from our beloved community, just like we do when we worship together, when we hug, when we hold hands. There is, even in times of great uncertainty, a love holding us. It is in our every footstep and in the brilliant wisdom that we all knew as children. The same wisdom that we are all invited to return to at any time. As we travel into a new year, as we travel into another week of social distancing, of mask wearing, of worrying and wondering, may we also travel into ourselves. May we travel to the places where we most need to hear, I am so proud of you. And rest assured that we are doing a wonderful job in the face of great big questions, even when we do not have the answers. May we remember to listen with our ears and our hearts. And may we remember that we are held by the unconditional love of our beloved community, even at a distance and even through the years that have no beat. May it be so.